So in this panel, finally, we're going to hear from people who know how it should be done. So I am delighted with this panel. So I'd like to request Cuauhtémoc Avila, Superintendent of the Unified School District.
Thank you very much. Are we on? So good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. And you may be asking yourself, where is Rialto Unified School District? Where it is the epicenter of culture and entertainment in Southern California, nestled between Fontana and the city of San Bernardino in San Bernardino County. And what we have here is going to be a summary of what we do in a summary of a summary, really, of what we do in the district, and we do quite a bit. But one thing that I really wanted to share with you as part of our core beliefs, and I wanted to emphasize the one towards the bottom, that everyone has the ability to contribute to the good of the community, whether local community, regional, and more global community. That's one of our core beliefs in the district. And we made every effort to align our presentation here, the few slides that we have here, to the format of the report to show, to kind of reference to see how we measure against what is being recommended by the report. And just as a part of our core beliefs, we do believe that climate change, environmental literacy is a civil rights issue. Knowing that Dr. Tony Knight from Oaks Park is doing an amazing job in his district. So the kids in Rialto deserve that very same level of opportunity to become environmental stewards, because we do have close to 80% of our kids who qualify or who are considered low-income students. And so we have the design opportunities to support student leadership and civic action, increase awareness and understanding of environmental issues, and promote behavioral changes and transform district policies and practices and policies to move towards sustainability. And so what we have here, again, is the ability for us to integrate environmental literacy principles and concepts as part of our professional development district-wide. We have also created our own local task force, which is called STEM CARES. CARE stands for Cultivating Actively Resilient Environmental Stewards. We also have made earth science indispensable by adopting a 3-year science graduation requirement and integrated science for the high school courses, so that earth science and space science is throughout the K-12 programs in our district. And here what we have is what you see here is images of third grade students participating in the Earth to Table event, having that opportunity to interact with local officials and to load food boxes and toiletry bags for families in need and those of the homeless community. We also have 5th graders who visit the local water treatment plant and learn about how the local drinking water is pulled from a nearby creek, and then those students go up to the creek to clean up the litter and debris. And we also have students who learn about the habitat loss of local endangered species. For us, one of them is the Delhi sandsfly, and students work with Rivers and Lands Conservancy to collect seeds from the native plants to create a native plant nursery that would support the endangered species habitat restoration project happening at their school. And this is part of what they're doing. We also students have an opportunity to look at alternative energy, water conservation, water quality, and also navigating a food desert, an area with limited access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And that's what you're seeing as part of what the students are doing at the high school. We're also focusing on promoting behavioral changes that will ensure long-term student health, such as the top left there, you see part of our local 5-kilometer called Run Around the Rocks, again, to keep the kids physically fit. We also have students incorporating more fruits and vegetables in their diets. You may not know, but San Bernardino County has one of the highest rates of chronic disease. like high blood pressure, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and high cholesterol. And so we do have fruit and vegetable gardens at every one of our elementary schools. And you'll see kids grow them, and every 2-3 months, kids will actually have them for breakfast or for lunch. And so they're seeing a lot of that in their actual meals. We also do field trips. This one here you see there, the Culinary Institute, to learn to make Native American Three Sisters soup. And then we also have students actually extending the outside gardens to the inside of the classroom and doing field trips on pollution and prevention. Here what you see, and this is I know this is a big topic throughout the state, and how do we support behavioral change by focusing on the total child. We do have district-wide initiative for PBIS. We have, at the high school in particular, we have wellness centers. We also have wellness gardens, healing gardens, and we're implementing our wellness centers and our wellness gardens at the middle schools this particular year. We do emphasize quite a bit on restorative practices, on circles, and we also have a partnership with the district where we do safe routes to school. District-wide, we're also doing district-wide solar panels, LED lighting district-wide. We do have a full-service CNG station that was completed approximately about a year ago. It's open to the public. We have approximately half of our buildings with white roofs, and we have district-wide high-efficiency HVAC. And the source of energy for everything that we're doing, and this may seem a little odd, but we're doing it through kindness. And not only kindness, but Rialto kindness. And this is important because to us, we developed this concept with the intention of making sure that we address the whole child. And this was done in the context of K-12. And so it will speak to the educators. So I will take a minute to read it to you. Kindness in its fullest expression exists when its two elements, empathy and personal honor, become one. Empathy means having the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing. It is exemplified by being good, helpful, and considerate towards others. Essentially, it means being a nice and caring person. Personal honor is to have self-discipline and presence and commendable work ethic. For educators, honor is exercising one's full powers to create conditions that generate new opportunities. It means being at work and on time every day while having agency to create policies, formations, or lessons that will have tremendous and lasting impact on others, especially students. And why do we do this? Because we know we have individuals who are very nice, very polite, but is that enough? Because we have we have some in our district for sure, who are nice and polite, but who are very lazy, okay? And that is an injustice to our kids. We also have those who are have a high work ethic, work very hard, but are grumpy. And imagine having a grumpy and lazy person educating our kids. So what we're striving for is to have those that have empathy and those that have personal honor, a high work ethic, because I think that will help us leverage the education that our kids truly deserve, especially in low-income communities like the Rialto Unified School District.
Thank
you very much.
Now we move on to Ms. Kavita Gupta. I talked to her for 2 minutes. Already she told me all the things we should and should not do.
Well, as a chemistry teacher, I tend to say I got all the solutions. What inspiring talks over since yesterday. It seems like my head's spinning with all the ideas and information. We have heard it over and over that we need to engage our youth in climate education. Well, I bring you good news as boots on the ground, a classroom teacher, that our youth want to learn about climate change. They have an appetite to learn about this issue of their times. The question in front of us is, how do we teach it effectively and impactfully? And as Governor Jerry Brown had pointed earlier this morning, that don't wait for the political class to save you. We realized it around 3 years ago that we couldn't rely on our political machinery and will need to work within our sphere of influence, which is our students. So we started thinking about how to introduce climate change in my AP chemistry classroom. Because I got asked on, but wait, aren't you a chemistry teacher? Because in that was my problem and solution both. So we started looking at the issues around climate education. There are many, but the two we decided to address, one was politicizing education by teaching climate change, and second was how do we bring a little bit more heart into climate change education, because we know changes happen when you tug at the heartstrings. So multidisciplinary education, how do we make it viable? How do we bring in our classroom? And we believe we have a solution. And our solution is based on Youth Participatory Action Research Model, which I'll be referencing as YPAR for abbreviating. So there are two key features of our model. Number one, we are teaching them research skills. We are not teaching them lessons or unit. Students are developing their own understanding of climate change based upon actual climate research and data. This somewhat mitigates the issue of politicizing education. Number two, because this is a research-based model, it can easily be superimposed on any curriculum without adding, this is the key part, without adding to the already burdened plates of the educators. And because we use this, we brought a lot of heart into this education and a lot of willingness on part of my peers to implement this model and engage their students in climate literacy. You may ask, what is the evidence that this model is successful? I'm saying there's a solution. Well, pictures are worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to share a few for you. This was a community event we organized in partnership with the Tech Museum in San Jose, where over 500 high schoolers participated, over 200 student presentations, over 100 projects from 25 participating teachers and 12 different disciplines. This event caught the eye of San Jose Mercury News, and we were featured on the front page. So next day, our students came running, Ms. Gupta, we are on the Mercury News. I said, wow, we are. Okay. So from here, let me show you some pictures. This is what the event looked like. These are all student presenters who are presenting to the community, and now the conversations went even bigger outside of the classroom in the community. This is artwork, ceramics, skit, paper mache polar bear, photo booth. They heard from the panelists, they listened to the scientists, they advocated to the policymakers, and needless to say, it was a really impactful event at so many levels. Now, I want you to guess what is this picture showing. The event was to open at 8 a.m. This is picture taken at 7 a.m., a long line of teenagers. No, it is not an Ariana Grande concert or a Chainsmokers concert. This is the Youth Climate Action Summit that we organized last year with support from National Geographic. So I have evidence that our youth want to learn about it. During this day-long conference, students learned from National Geographic explorers, from Dr. Bob Ballard, from their own, and they even talked to students, much like we heard from Education Minister from Italy last night. They heard from their colleagues in Galapagos and in Florida. And the Florida youth were so inspired by them that they are organizing their own Youth Climate Action Summit. So this model is scalable. It is ready to go to make it easy for the teachers. And my closing remarks here are, my belief is an effective climate education does not end with a lesson or unit. It helps shape the attitudes of tomorrow's leaders, policymakers, and voting citizens. When we engage students and in meaningful way and talk to their heart it leaves lasting impact that goes beyond the day, that shapes their attitudes as they are brushing and the water is running, or to motivate them to maybe walk some more days, or to inconvenience themselves for the sake of planet, to taking big decisions. And I hope you'll consider YPAR as an effective model for pre-service, in-service, anybody. And youth have a voice, and we need to do right by them because we must. We don't have a choice. Thank you.
So we now go to our student representative from CSU Chico, Sofia Lepore.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sofia. Like Ram said, I use she, her pronouns. And thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I'm so grateful to be here. I want to start by saying that I've never considered myself before to be an activist. It's not something I chose to do. But when I witnessed the devastation that the campfire caused about 15 minutes away from my hometown, Chico, I knew I had to do something. I want to start by talking a little bit about my experience at Chico State and the climate education that I've had thus far. I was lucky in that I learned about climate change at Chico. Thankfully, the geography department has some of the most engaging and empowering climate curriculum out there, largely due to Dr. Mark Steeman, who's here today. Yeah, he deserves it. One of the most impactful projects I've been a part of was through one of his classes called Environmental Thought and Action, which completely expanded my mind. The structure of the class actually allowed for us students to choose and develop an advisory measure for the spring student election ballot. At first, we toyed with the idea of instituting a garden or banning single-use plastics on campus, but then in the end, we realized that implementing climate curriculum was the most important action that we could take. If students didn't understand the roots of the crisis, we weren't addressing the elephant in the room. And the initiative passed with a record high 84% approval. So I want to emphasize that we use the language of climate change, not sustainability, because they're two different things. Right? Sustainability is a product of the climate crisis and therefore has great importance. But for students to be able to tackle climate change in their respective fields, they have to understand the roots of the crisis. It's easy to avoid climate change. It's terrifying, it's huge, it's daunting, right? And it's easy to focus on something like recycling or the plastic straw ban, which are important, but in the bigger scheme of things, that's not going to get us where we need to go. One of the things I think that the youth movement has done well is that we have demanded a proper climate education. I'd argue that the youth movement is a large part of why we're all sitting here right now. But one of the obstacles that we face when it comes to the implementation of this climate education is making sure that everyone is learning it, not just STEM students. Through the Sunrise movement, I do a lot of outreach on campus, and I found myself having to convince students that we are indeed in a crisis before I can encourage them to participate. And I shouldn't have to be teaching psychology or business or English majors this stuff. They should already know. Many students don't realize that climate change will affect their majors unless they are a STEM student. If they're an agricultural student in Northern California, for instance, they don't learn that 2/3 of their crop chill hours will be lost, or that they might not be able to grow the same crops that are viable now. If they're a business student, they aren't taught about the new technologies that we will need to depend on, or the new business practices that must be instilled if we're going to move away from fossil fuels. If they study psychology, they aren't taught about climate anxiety and depression that are growing exponentially as more and more young people learn that their futures are not guaranteed. Part of our campaigning strategy for the adoption of student climate education at Chico State was to show students how their education will shift, right? To bring them into this narrative, something that's emphasized in the ECLPS report. I printed out the quarter sheets that we used with more specific examples if anyone would like to come grab one after the panel. Climate change is no longer for environmentalists, right? This is everyone's job. And we young people have made it clear that this is our priority. Without climate action, what's the point in getting a degree that could be lost or significantly altered due to this crisis? And to bend the curve, we have to include everyone in that process, which is something that is emphasized in the Green New Deal and the ECLPS report. Without an understanding of the intersectionality of climate change and the roots of historic oppression and injustice, this crisis will only deepen. Those who contribute the least often suffer the most. And if we are truly going to enact change worthy of the name climate justice, we have to address these historic inequities, and we must look to our indigenous leaders for their wisdom and knowledge of our lands. Thank you. It's my hope that this conference and the ECLPS effort will incorporate some of the fierceness of the youth movement and continue to include us in the process of implementing climate change curriculum in the state. Young people are sounding the alarm, and ECLPS can help to elevate the youth voice like never before, like you've done so today. I'll end with this. Climate change should not be taught without a call to action. There are incredible movements all over the world, the Sunrise Movement, Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, that make real, tangible change. And that activism must be emphasized. It must be supported. We have been patient for too long. It's time for the adults in academia, government, and places of power to pivot and get uncomfortable, because that's what it's going to take to make the change that our survival depends on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophia. You made CSU proud and all of us proud. Thank you. So we go to Bill Sandoval, Professor of Education, UCLA.
Thank you. So I'm very pleased to be here with all of you this morning. Welcome to UCLA. I see a lot of I'm a professor in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies here. Glad to see a lot of my colleagues here in the room. I come to this panel and this topic as an education researcher. So I've worked with teachers to study ways of teaching and learning science in classrooms for about 25 years now, first in Chicago and for the last couple of decades here in Los Angeles. And what I want to consider here is how the climate literacy goals that are expressed in the ECLPS report sort of articulate with the next generation science standards that Marcia McNutt was talking about. And the reason I think it's important to do that is because teachers in California and throughout the country are accountable to those standards, right? They're not really accountable in their working lives to climate literacy or environmental justice or any of the things that we might care about in this room. And so if we're going to help do this, if we're going to get this kind of stuff to really happen at a broad scale, we have to figure out how we can work with teachers so that they don't perceive this as an extra burden that we're asking them to do. I have been working for the last several years with colleagues at the UCLA Science Project to do professional development with teachers in a small school district in metropolitan Los Angeles, a little bit east of downtown. It is about 98% Latina students. About 2/3 of them are on free and reduced lunch. About 30% of the kids in this district are English learners. But within the district, there's actually a fair amount of economic diversity. So it's a pretty typical sort of urban LA kind of school district. And we've learned some things from working with these teachers that suggest some challenges that we have to help teachers overcome if we're going to be successful in this effort. So I think I've learned this morning that I think Governor Brown and I might share a certain predilection to focus on problems rather than optimism. So I'm going to try to articulate a few of the sort of problems that I think we have to address as teacher educators if we're really going to see the goals of this project happen. One is that, so you've heard from a couple of different people that what we know helps kids learn science better is if they actually do some science, right? If you tell kids science, We have a lot of data that says they don't learn that. They don't learn that science very well, and they don't learn it deeply enough to be able to do anything with it. So the next generation standards sort of demand that teachers engage kids in authentic sort of practices of science along the lines that Kavita was describing and we've heard from some other people. Well, a great many teachers need help in figuring out how to do that. Not very many science teachers have actually done scientific research themselves, and so they're not that certain about how to help kids do scientific research. So one of our big challenges as teacher educators is to help teachers learn how to do these things in ways that they can get their kids to do it. A second thing that we've learned, again, related to NGSS is that, so I don't know how many folks in this room are familiar with these new standards, but one of the things that one of the big differences between them and older standards for science education in the United States is that they want science to be sort of framed as we learn science concepts in order to explain things in the natural world, right? This may seem pretty obvious, but that's not what science classrooms have tended to look like in the United States for the last 100 years. You learn science concepts in order to learn science concepts so you can take more science classes. So the NGSS doesn't want this to be the case. And so helping teachers learn to orient their instruction sort of away from the discipline per se and towards phenomena in the world is a really crucial aspect to it. Our research is finding that that's an aspect of the standards that teachers find that they become most readily able to take up. And so it's really a good place to think about climate change education, because you can start to think about local climate phenomena that you could anchor instruction around. Now, if Marcia, I think Marcia has left, but if Marcia were here, she might be mad at what I'm going to say next. And that is that in the last 3 or 4 years since the NGSS have come out, there have been at least 3 analyses of the standards as they relate to the standards kind of position on climate change and environmental justice. And the NGSS, and to be clear, they're the best standards we've ever had in science education in this country. They are the most reflective of what we know. They're the most reflective of what we know about science learning and about how science actually gets done. So they're great. But let's think about the report. The Summit report here is very clear on its sort of relational perspective between humans and ecological systems, that we are part of those systems. It's clear on the socio-political aspects of climate change and our response to it. It's clear on the need for education to address environmental injustice, and it's explicit about these issues playing out locally. The NGSS is silent on all of these things, okay? So we're going to need to create sort of mechanisms and infrastructures that can bridge those gaps. So I'm over time. If you out in the room, you don't realize how intimidating it is to have a big clock staring at you here.
I'm watching too.
So since I'm over time like everyone else, let me just finish very quickly. So as you heard, Darlene Tew and a student working with me, Heather Clark, have been doing work at one of the community schools that UCLA runs, the Mann Community School. And they've been doing the kind of thing that I think we need to see more of, and actually it's very, looks like what Kavita is doing. So I think there are 3 things that I would sort of emphasize from the report in work moving forward. One is the need for localization. And so what that means for teacher education, teacher preparation is, yeah, we need good curricula. We absolutely do. But we also need to help teachers learn how to localize curricula to the places that they work, because climate change is a global phenomenon, but its effects and its impacts are local, and we have to help people deal with that. We need to help teachers develop what Tia Madkins, who's a scholar at the University of Texas, calls political clarity. Science is not always that comfortable at acknowledging that it's a political enterprise. And if we're going to help kids learn science in ways that help them act politically, then we've got to take the political nature of these problems head on, and we have to help teachers understand how to do that in classrooms, in places where that might be antagonistic to that. And then finally, just to echo something that folks have already said earlier, is that this work has to be done in ways that gives kids agency. And if we're going to take this notion of agency seriously, then we have to acknowledge that it's multivocal. So not everybody's going to think the same way we do. And we maybe don't want to try to get everybody to think the same way we do. We have to help them develop their own perspectives for acting in the communities in which they live. Thanks.
Thank you. Now to Tim, a teacher at Portland Public Schools.
Thank you. So my name's Tim Swinehart, and I am sort of an odd duck here. I'm a social studies teacher. So I'm gonna talk to you a little bit about what I've learned over the last 10 years teaching about the climate crisis from the perspective of a social studies teacher. And I'm gonna do my best to stick to my notes because this clock is really intimidating. So I'm going to really focus on kind of two terms, climate justice and student activism. And I really want to make the argument that climate literacy that we talked about really needs to be deeply rooted in teaching for social and environmental justice. And I've been really happy to hear people emphasize that already last night and today. 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with a mentor of mine, Bill Bigelow, to draw together resources for teachers. And I'm used to doing workshops for teachers, so if I apologize if my presentation here is a little resource heavy. But you know, I'm used to kind of handing things over to people that they can take to the classroom the next day and use. So we really saw three ways that we wanted to story the climate crisis in a people's curriculum for the earth as we were putting that together. One was to story the unequal and unjust ways that the climate crisis plays out. Two was to really take a hard look at the root causes of the climate crisis, especially the fact that it is caused and rooted in an economic system that privileges profit over people and the planet. And I think that we can't shy away from that when we're talking about climate literacy. Another mentor of mine, Naomi Klein, has called out very strictly that we have to name capitalism as we fight this crisis. And as a social studies teacher, I couldn't emphasize that more. Number three was that we really wanted to show how some of the most hopeful and inspiring visions for a just and sustainable future are coming from the communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. So two of the activities that are shown up here are two role plays, one based on the Indigenous Peoples Global Summit on Climate Change that happened in 2009. And so it puts students into the position of looking from the perspective of some of those groups. As well as the small peasant farmers movement that is the largest social movement in the world that no one's ever heard of, called La Via Campesina, that really presents some extraordinary solutions to locally based solutions to the climate crisis. I've also had the chance to work a little bit on the Zen Education Project's Teach Climate Justice project over the last couple years. And so there's a couple more examples of curriculum up here. I have become, the last few years, increasingly focused on writing curriculum that highlights the power and vibrancy of social movements that are growing up in response to the climate crisis. I was so happy to hear the discussion of the Sunrise Movement. You know, these social movements are, up until recently, the youth climate movement has helped to remedy this, but they're largely invisible in our media and in our curriculum in a lot of ways. And I think that it's really hard for our students to imagine themselves as part of a movement they can't see. And they need to be able to do this. Without the ability to see social movements and imagine the better world, it is true that despair is just a step away from a lesson about the climate crisis. Increased climate literacy without a focus on activism and social movements can lead right to despair. And that is not what we want to be doing as educators, right, when we're working to increase knowledge of the climate crisis. And I think we really have to be attentive to that. And so two examples up here again that are focusing on social movements, sharing that activism with students. One other thing I wanted to touch on was the way in which we are trying to implement this in Portland Public Schools. We passed a landmark resolution through our school board in 2016 that names climate literacy and climate justice and requires that be it's official school district policy that's taught to all Portland Public Schools. We're pretty sure we were the first school district in the nation to pass a climate justice education policy. My environmental justice class up here was a result of that policy, and we've had a chance to engage in direct climate activism as part of the official curriculum in Portland Public Schools as a result of that policy. Two things from the resolution. One is that frontline voices and frontline peoples need to be centered. Why does this matter? We've heard this in the land acknowledgement last night and this morning, that if we're not centering frontline and indigenous voices and peoples in our climate education efforts, then we're likely reinforcing the systems of colonization that have caused this crisis in the first place. This is so important. And then here, I love that this language is official policy in Portland Public Schools, that students should develop confidence and passion when it comes to making a positive difference in society and come to see themselves as activists and leaders for social and environmental justice. That's what guides my teaching in Portland because of this policy that we passed. And, you know, I really think that this, again, is such an important antidote to the despair that students are experiencing at this moment. And my final slide here is that over the last few weeks, I got to watch my environmental justice students that come from our mostly white and privileged high school support the vision for a climate strike that was envisioned by frontline indigenous student activists at a high school across town. And so watching those two groups of students come together and plan this climate strike that brought to the forward the voices of frontline indigenous student climate organizers was profound. It was an incredible on-the-job learning experience for all of these young climate activists, and I think that it is really exactly the sort of climate justice education that we should all be striving to work towards. Thank you.
That was really amazing. We heard what's happening in the field. So I have one question each to the 5 panelists, and I'll say it all now so you can think about it. First to Superintendent Avila. As far as ECLPS is concerned, how do we start the process of implementing what our vision is in the report? Do we work with superintendents of schools like you? Or do we start from the bottom up? We heard examples here from Teacher Gupta and Teacher Tim Swinehart. So give us some idea about how to scale it up. Do you see it as a top-down approach or a combination of multiple approaches? And to Teacher Gupta, I want to ask her this question, which has been puzzling me, is that climate change has become extremely political, right? And if you listen to the media, it depends on which one you listen. Either it's all confirmed or it's completely bogus science. Or even amongst those convinced, they don't feel it's urgent enough to take actions. So how does a teacher, say in Central Valley or in Texas, who want to follow your example, deal with the child comes and tells you, oh, I heard from the president that it's junk. But you have some insights on that. And to Sofia, I want to mention to her that yesterday she said her parents and grandparents are here. So I decided I need to ask a safe question which she knows how to answer. So I told her, give me some questions, and she gave me a slip and I've lost it. It's not here. So I'm going to ask you, but after listening to you, I don't think you need any prompts like that. So I talk to the public, mainly through churches. And I always have this fear, I'm going to leave them so paralyzed. In spite of everything I say, that it's time for solutions, this, that, and the other. Are you paralyzed when you heard all the things today from myself, that I said there is a, extinction threat, existential threat, and you heard from Governor Jerry Brown, you saw from Eric Rignot. So share us your insight into how you stay still focused and positive, okay? So Bill Sandoval, my fellow professor in the UC system, I have the toughest question for him. I started a process last year at UCSD that we have to teach climate change. By climate change, mind you, I don't mean science. Science could be just a few lectures. The solutions, the climate justice issue, I want every student to know about this. So they told me, just talk to the provost in each college. I was happy with that. Then they said, you talk to the students. I thought that was even good too. Then there came the kiss of death. They said you have to persuade the academic senate. I'm 75. I don't think I'm going to live long enough to pursue an academic senate. So share us how you would do it at UCLA. To me, it's inexcusable. We are sending our students out where I'm saying in 10 years from now, you're going to transition from the current stage to the truly dangerous stage. So you can't just send them like that. So tell us how to do this so that every student graduating from every campus at California have to go out with the knowledge of climate. What is the world they're going to face, and what are the solutions? And to Tim Swinehart, I mean, it's amazing. They already passed what we are trying to do here. Thank you. So I reserve the most difficult question to answer to you. You talked about climate justice, but the issue here is different. If you want to help the vulnerable, you have to persuade the billion wealthy people in the planet. I think all of us belong in that category. I don't mean billionaires. The top 50 to 60% of the pollution comes from the wealthiest 1 billion. They're living everywhere. India has 50 million of them. China, 200 million. So if you set up the stage, it's the climate justice, and point fingers at them, if they back off, you're sending the vulnerable even quickly down the cliff. So how do we bring up the climate justice issue, but at the same time bring those who are polluting the planet as part of the solution? So we'll start with Avila.
So I'll preface it by saying that a little over 4 years ago, when I first joined the Rialto Unified School District, there were two things that really struck me. One is, as I walked through the front office, I saw that it was very adult and position-centric. Every cabinet member, board member, principal, everybody's picture was in the front office. Not one child's image was in that front office. The other thing I noticed within 4 months after driving around one day parking, trying to park and watching others park in the parking lot, half the parking lot was empty. But there were still people circling, trying to find a parking spot. Why? Because it seems that everybody had an assigned parking spot. So within a week, I had all the assigned parking spots in the entire district whitewashed because I learned that we needed to be on an equal plane. And so we are no longer a vertically organized district. We're not top-down. We're a flat org chart because everybody has a voice. And so to answer the question, it cannot be to me, it cannot come from top down. It has to involve those responsible for implementing what it is that we're trying to implement. That voice has to be there because they're the ones that are left with the task of implementing what someone else creates and directs to them. So to answer your question, teachers have to be a part of this conversation, and however we approach it, through a planning team, a focus group, it has to be majority teachers at the table, and not just high school teachers, but teachers from preschool all the way through 12th grade.
Professor Ram, I think you gave me the hardest question, but I'll try my best. And I will answer this question by stating a quote I read on my Facebook feed yesterday. And it said, you don't bring change, or you do not change people by pointing fingers at them. And our real work, if we want to move needle on this, is in these states where there is not so much acceptance for climate change. I have my fellow educators, they say they are doing the work, but they cannot use the word climate change or their funding would be slashed. And that is where our work is. So we need to meet them where they are, rather than polarizing or being judgmental towards them. We need to engage them in conversations. So if a student comes to me and says, oh, I don't believe in climate change, I said, wow, interesting. Help me understand more. Let's look at some data. Tell me, research, and tell me, based upon data, why do you believe that? And I'm hoping somewhere in those million data, they will find the truth. If not, there is a language they understand. Maybe they don't believe in science. Maybe they don't believe in climate change, but they do believe in economics. How about the economical aspect of it? Yeah, I heard a little clap. You can clap louder. But yes, our work is challenging in that realm, but we must engage all communities. I am literally picking the low-hanging fruit here, being in California, sitting in this group, but our work belongs everywhere in the United States. Thank you.
All right. Well, I first want to say thanks for outing me like that, Ram. This one's for you, Mom, and Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Lisa. So, yeah, that's a big question, and is such a daunting subject, right? Learning about climate change, and I'm 22 years old and have no idea what my future is going to look like, if I will even be able to have children. These are things that people my age are thinking about, and it's a horrible thing to have to consider at such a young age. But as I was talking about some of Dr. Mark's classes, one of the most important parts of them is, after learning, all these devastating statistics about climate change, he channels us with action. He gives us a voice, and that voice is empowering, and it's why I'm here today. I'm part of the Sunrise movement. Those of you who haven't heard, Sunrise is the youth-led movement to stop climate change and create millions of green jobs in the process. And we have this one statistic that we love at Sunrise, and that is that it takes 3.5% of a population to get out on the streets, stopping business as usual and demanding transformative action. It's what worked during the Vietnam protests, it's what worked during the civil rights movement, and we've seen it time and time again in countless social shifts. So that is what we need to be able to implement that change. And that statistic keeps me going. Part of Sunrise's DNA is simply community building. Some of my dearest friends are people from my Sunrise Hub. We support each other, we listen to each other. We build each other up, and we sing, something as small as that. Just singing songs and building that community creates a space where people want to come back. They feel heard, they feel represented, they feel like they've been lifted up. And, that's one of the most important things that we can do for all of these youth who are looking to you, our educators and our leaders, for somewhere to go. Thank you.
So I thought by the time it got to me, I'd have an answer to Ram's question. And I actually think, thank you, Sophia, because I think Sophia just gave me the beginning of an answer. So And that is that I think, universities have been organized for a long time in departments and colleges and other kinds of silos that really inhibit our ability to develop agreement, even conversations around, what is there some course or set of courses that everybody in the university should take, right? I think it's very difficult, and there are probably good reasons why it should be. I mean, it's important if if you're in a particular field, of course you're going to stand up for that field. But I think that so rather than try to persuade the academic senate that there ought to be some specific course, I think where I would try to start is to persuade the academic senate or other sort of powers in the university to help us develop infrastructures that would increase our information exchange with each other, that would increase our ability to collaborate across departmental silos. Because I think if you did that, you could begin to develop the 3.5% groundswell that you'd need to actually do real change.
I wanted to make sure that I understood it seemed like what you were asking is how do we engage the people who, that kind of 1% that you were talking about, how do we engage that group of people in a climate justice struggle?
It's not that 1% is included, it's a
Right.
million people.
Right.
15% of the population.
Right. And like, I mean, saying that like this room is part of that, right? And so I also wanted to lean on Sofia, which I think we probably all of us should be doing. We need to be listening, right, to what young people, I think, are like clarifying so clearly for us at this point. And I think that what the Sunrise Movement has done such a spectacular job of is helping people to see a vision of a world that we actually want to live in, right? Because like we're surrounded by these dystopian visions of the future that are leading. I think half my high school students these days say that they're planning not to have kids, and I could break in. Like my daughters are on their way to see me here right now, my 10 and 7-year-old daughters. And when I hear my students say that, it just absolutely breaks my heart. We have to be able to see a world where we want to bring kids into it. And so I think a few people have already mentioned that we have to see this crisis as an opportunity as well. And so I think that the way that we engage people who are benefiting in so many ways right now from the way the world is set up and from the pollution, from this extractive sort of polluting way of living, is just to see that we can actually make a world that we're all going to benefit from so much more. When we destroy these systems of colonization, and racial justice is important for everyone, right? Climate justice is important for everyone, and so I think it is that visioning process then that is going to bring everybody into the fold.
Distinguished friends, this is one of the most encouraging, cheerful sessions on climate change I have attended in a long time. Thank you. And I take no credit for assembling this panel. I have to give the credit to the steering committee and the subcommittees, and to Linda Livers, who put it all together. Thank you.